Hi, welcome to Biblical Heroes in Medieval Song. My name is Jeremy Rhizor, and I'm the Artistic Director of the Academy of Sacred Drama. I'm joined today by our esteemed guest, Peter Walker, who's a bass baritone and a player of medieval instruments. So thanks for being here today, Peter.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Peter and I have known each other for a long time now, I think. He sang for me in the very first oratorio I ever did in 2014. He appears in the promotional video that we made when we incorporated in 2017. And that was a little bit of a Baroque music that won't appear in the rest of the program. And he's appeared in a bunch of other oratorios over the course of the Academy's history. So I'm delighted that he was able to do this program. And it's our first program of the year where I'm not playing online. So we have a guest artist, and eventually we'll expand that to other people as well. So if you keep joining us, look out for that. So today's program is very different from the Baroque era fare that we usually present, but is still in that venerable tradition of sacred drama. Before we all get started, I just want to let you know that at any time during our presentation, you can ask Peter and me questions on our Discord channel. So if you're watching on YouTube, the link for that is in the description. And if you're watching on GiveButter, go down to the story section and there's a link for you to sign up. You'll be asked for a username, and that can be a fake name or a real name, and a password. And it's pretty easy to set up, but you have to agree to their terms and privacy. So take a look at that before you get started. And if you're watching on YouTube, it helps us quite a bit if you actually like our videos and subscribe to our channel. That helps us get the word out in a very easy way without any cost to you or me, and allows us to get the word out about the work that the Academy of Sacred Drama is doing. So Peter recorded the footage of today's program last week in St. Paul's on the Green. Is that right, Peter?
Yes, that's correct, in Norwalk, Connecticut.
And each of these clips starts out with your wife, Sarah, introducing them with a biblical passage. Could you tell us a little bit about the translation of the Bible for those?
Sure. My wife, Sarah, is a professional storyteller and works with assorted groups that do this stories and music sort of thing. We performed together as Chapter House. She had an album released with Skylark recently. And so it seemed only natural to bring her into this. The translation that we used is by John Wycliffe, who was a 14th century Englishman, later put on trial for heresy, but he, before all of that happened, made a very, very lovely translation of the Bible into late 14th century Middle English. It's, as you'll hear from Sarah's narration, it sounds distinctly medieval. You'll hear things that you wouldn't hear in everyday conversation. But much like Malory or Shakespeare, if you just let it wash over you, and you probably know these stories anyhow, it will all become very clear. You'll be able to get yourself into that sound world.
And you're accompanying yourself for this program on some instruments that probably a lot of people watching haven't seen yet. Could you tell us a little bit about the hurdy-gurdy?
Sure. Yeah, so for 3 out of the 4 pieces, I'm using an instrument called a hurdy-gurdy. Hurdy-gurdy is a fairly modern term. In the Middle Ages, it probably would have been called a symphonia or an organistrum. It's sort of like a mechanical violin. So if one is not as talented as Jeremy and can't actually play the violin, one can play the hurdy-gurdy instead, and that's what I do. It's a box, a wooden box. The medieval hurdy-gurdy looks a bit like a very pretty shoebox. And it's got 4 strings on the inside. 2 of them are drones, which means they just sound the same note continuously, like the drones of a bagpipe or something. That's a great way to accompany chant, as you'll hear. 2 of the strings have a little mechanism that lets you change pitch. It's got a keyboard with little bits of wood called tangents, and when you push the key, the tangent touches the string and changes the length of the string depending on which key you press, and you can play different pitches that way. You'll hear at the beginning of the first song, I play a bit with the keyboard as well. Most of the time it's used mainly as a drone box, because that seems to be a wonderful way to accompany chant and sequences and things. We know these were quite popular in the Middle Ages. There's a great book called the Cantigas de Santa Maria from the court of Alfonso X in Spain that has many, many illustrations, beautiful colored illustrations of people playing medieval instruments. And there are two people playing hurdy-gurdies that look almost exactly like mine in that. There are also stone carvings of them in many of the great cathedrals of Europe as well.
Well, let's just roll the video and we can talk a little bit about it after we've seen it.
Sounds great.
Forsooth, the earth was corrupt before a God, and was filled with wickedness. And when a God saw that the earth was corrupt, for each flesh had corrupt his way on earth, he said to Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me. The earth is filled with wickedness, and I shall destroy him with the earth. Make thou today a ship of trays, hewn and planed. Thou shalt make dwelling places in the ship, and thou shalt anoint it with pitch, within and out forth. Lo, I shall bring a waters of great flood on earth, and I shall slay each flesh in which is the spirit of life under heaven, and all the things that are on earth shall be wasted. Therefore Noah did all the things which God commanded to him. Also the Lord said to Noah, enter thou and all thy house into the ship, for I say thee just before me in this generation. Of all clean living beasties thou shalt take 7 and 7, male and female. Forsooth of unclean living beasties thou shalt take 2 and 2, male and female. But also of fowls of heaven thou shalt take 7 and 7, male and female, that their kind be saved on the face of all earth. Therefore did Noah all things which the Lord commanded to him. And Noah entered into the ship, and his sons and his wife, and the wives of his sons entered with him. And when 7 days had passed, all the wells of the great sea were unbroken, and the windows of heaven were unopened, and rain was made on earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And the great flood was made 40 days and 40 nights on earth, and the waters were multiplied, and raised the ship on high from earth. The waters flowed greatly, and filled all the things on the face of earth. For so that the ship was borne on the waters, and the waters had mastery greatly on earth, and all the high hills under all the heaven were in hid. All the men, and all the things in which the breathing of life was in earth, were dead. And God did away all substance that was on earth, from man to beast, as well the creeping beasts as the birds of heaven. And they were done away from earth. Forsooth Noah dwelt alone, and they that were with him in the ship.
Omnis caro peccaverat, viam suam corruperat, homo Deum reliquerat, lex naturae perierat. Hinc conditor irascitur, intus dolore tangitur, quasi desse conqueritur, et ad noe sic loquitur. Me coram caro corui, homo turpe desipuit, legem nature poluit, nil nisi mortem meruit. Ut sciat humanibus locutum fuisse, penitet me penitus hominem fecisse, stupor et prodigium quod supervicinis, coram me mortalium iminet iam finis. Homines disperdere cum terra profidi, tibi volo parcere nam te justum vidi. Tuque tui filii vestris cum uxoribus, nihil estis noxi, tantis in excessibus. Vos indemnes eritis cum condempnem noxios, octore manevitis omnis perdam alios. Perdam volatilia, perdam omnem bestiam, pauca seminaria, vobus cum custodia. Ergo noe concito, arcam tibi facito, de lignis eligito, que sunt apsiora, leviga sagaciter, et coniunge pariter, opus fac viriliter, tota labora. Facque mansi unculas, plures et non pauculas, arce per particulas, non te tardet mora, linies intrinsicus arcam et extrinsecus, tenacibitumine. Ut in aqua fluvida sit fortis et solida, picis nexa glutine. Cibos animansium inferes intransium, pecoriscum homine. Bestias inferius et aves superius, tecum collocabis, ostium in latere deorsum componere, prudens procurabis. Fenestram in culmine ut fruaris lumine, sursum preparabis. Culmen sursum ducito et pandem incubito, arcam consumabis. Trecentorum cubitorum arce longitudo, quinquagindum cubitorum erit latitudo, et triginda cubitorum erit altitudo. Anc intrabis habitabis et vitabis imminens periculum, tu et nati tibi dati procreati ut sustenens seculum, intret sexus cuius nexus per amplexus dilatabit populum. De mundis animantibus in singulis generibus, tolle septena paria, de Dei mundisque macula feda sit simplex copula serve sut seminaria. Tu cum ista compleveris vide moram ne feceris descendita me pluvia. Arcam cum ingressus eris vide moram ne feceris de supernis ego pluam et omnes nefastiluam. Quater de nos simulties nulla tenebit requies, incessanter imbres ruent, omne munum superfluent. Vita, salus et pax erit, idis quos arca clauserit, et qui foris eam erunt, omnes discrimen perferunt. Arche parata, noa mandata, Domini peregit, et bene nota, quod unum iota, justus non infregit. Omnia dicta fide non ficta, complere sategit. Imbres runt, nubes plunt, unde flunt, labentes cum impetu, crescunt aquae circum quaque fluminaque cum immenso strepitu, sic mundum carne, mundum in profundum pedisse cum sonitu, involvuntur fluctibus juvenes cum senibus, filie cum matribus. Sic merguntur impii, male sibi conscii, parentes et filii. Solo salvat arcas justus, cuius fides est et custos, Dei misericordia.
Wow, that's quite a song. Quite something. I don't always think of Noah as necessarily a hero. I think of him more as someone who follows instructions really well. And in that song and in the biblical passage, I guess, there's a lot of very specific instructions. So what do you think about putting that together in a program with heroes?
Well, you're right. Noah isn't a warrior like King David or something like that. But I think that one could make an argument, especially from a medieval perspective, that a hero is someone who follows instructions, provided they're the right sort of instructions, you know? I do enjoy the detail in that song. If you had a cubit tape measure handy, you could build your own ark from it, I think.
Yeah, and I think the imagery is extremely vivid. Now, these days, we always expect that everything that we do, we could easily trace, we could find online somewhere, and there'd be an exact blueprint, or there would be 300 years worth of visual art that corresponds with that subject. And for this audience, we're mostly dealing with an auditory experience, and the details very, very relevant to what they experience, I think.
Yes, it certainly is. And the Hebrew Bible, having grown out of an oral tradition, you get these instructions like that, the storytelling devices, like the days of creation and things. It's scripture, but it feels like folktale as well, which is just wonderful and really translates well into song. Also, this particular song, I think, is a rather close paraphrase of Genesis put into medieval Latin verse.
I like the idea of a like sort of alternate world, a sort of fantastical world, and I think that we've sort of watered down our ability to be able to live in the present age in a world that's both fantastical but also scientific at the same time, and be able to have a true sense of awe for life.
Yes, yes, and that's another thing that we could tie into the detail even. The idea of a flood destroying the earth sounds so mythological and fantastic to us today, but here we can talk about it and say, and not only was he saved by the ark he made, but here are the exact dimensions of the ark he made, and here's how he did it. It gives a nice, I don't want to say real world, that's absolutely not the right choice of word, but a nice quantifiable tie-in to something that feels so difficult to imagine for us.
Yeah, well, at least a crossover between those two different ways of thinking, and that's an exciting thing.
Yes, yes it is.
So before we get on to the next video, I wanted to ask you what else you're doing during this time. I know it's a difficult time for artists all around and musicians, and I know you're doing a few of these online performances. Do you want to mention any of those?
Sure, yes. So the first one of these I did was back in May, and that was through the Skylark Vocal Ensemble. Skylark's a wonderful ensemble that I work with regularly, and every ensemble is trying to figure out how to navigate this new way of doing things where we can't gather for concerts. And what Skylark has done is create something called Skylark Plus, where you can get a subscription to it, and then they have Skylark artists create content. These can be online recitals. We've had, 5 or 6 by now, one by me and many by other wonderful artists. Our artistic director has done various talks on all sorts of subjects, interviews with choral singers. So I got to be a part of that back in May. Sarah and I, my wife, the storyteller, we performed together as Chapter House, and Chapter House was supposed to perform this summer for the Society for Historically Informed Performance, with the snappy acronym SOHIP. We were supposed to perform some concerts in the Boston area this summer, which were naturally canceled. And SOHIP has also moved all its performances online. So just this past Wednesday, we released our new Robin Hood concert through SOHIP. You can find that if you search for the Society for Historically Informed Performance or SOHIP Boston. You can find their webpage, and you can see some songs that are about the same length, but they're all in modern English. So if you need a palate cleanser after the real dense medieval stuff, you can go listen to some Robin Hood. And I've done this. I've recorded a few things for the Handel and Haydn Society, the Texas Early Music Project, and things. It's it's a matter of learning how to do all of these things, like be your own producer. And I'm lucky enough to have a wife who is very good at video editing and things. And we're all making the best of this new world order that we find ourselves in.
And I do appreciate that you're on the Academy series too. So thank you, Peter.
Yes, I'm honored to be a part of it.
I see that we already have a Discord question, but we'll wait until after the next video. And I just want to remind everybody who's tuning in that if they'd like to see what we're doing and ask us any questions, check out our Discord channel, and that's in the description of the YouTube video or the story section of our Give Better page. So please write us a question. We have one already, and we'll address any questions after the next performance. What's coming up next is about the story of Samson, and it's mostly from his perspective. Is that right, Peter?
Yes, that's right. This is a very nicely constructed piece. I mean, these all are great. The medieval poetic forms are wonderful. But this one is particularly dramatic. We have 4 distinct voices in it. So the beginning is a sort of chorus voice. It's the modern reader or hearer talking to Samson. It says, "Samson, what are you doing here in the dungeon?" You'll see in the translations, but at the beginning we're talking to Samson. And then Samson himself enters, and his first note is the highest pitch in the entire song. And we often think of our heroes as baritones and things these days, which I obviously approve of, but I think that his voice is pitched high to make it very, very prominent and strong. Naturally, when you're singing, if a note is higher, you're going to sing it louder. And that helps Samson to have a nice, impressive entrance. So he sings about his adventures for quite some time. And eventually, we hear from Delilah. Now, Delilah's entrance is also fascinating because she enters on a pitch that's a fourth above the drone. Now, without going into too much music theory or anything, the most settled interval you can sing besides the unison with the drone is the fifth above the drone. The fourth doesn't quite sound settled. And so I suspect from that we're supposed to get the idea that we shouldn't quite trust Delilah, perhaps. She comes in singing in what is almost a different mode. It's not, it's the same mode eventually, but it has a definite flavor of a different mode at the beginning. So she sings, she seduces Samson, and he falls for it. Spoilers, I suppose, but you knew that was coming. And then we get a few interjections from the princes of the Philistines, telling Samson to dance for them and things. Then Samson sings again, and the very last line we hear from the chorus again. For this victory, let Samson be glorified.
We'll move on right into that right now, but right before we do, I just want to mention that the first translations were by John Stevens, and these are by Peter Dronke.
That's right, yes.
Samson.
Therefore Samson went forth with his father and mother, and when they had come to the vineyards of the city, a fierce and roaring a lion appeared, and ran to Samson. For so the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson, and he tore apart the lion, and he had no thing in his hand. And after some days, he turned away to say the carrion of the lion, and lo, a gathering of bees was in the mouth of the lion, and a comb of honey. And when he had attacked in handus, he ate in the way. And he came to his father and mother, and he part to him, and they aten. Forsooth, after some deal of time, Samson came, and would visit his wife. And when he would enter in to see her, the father of her forbade him. To whom Samson answered, For this day no blame shall be on me against Philistines, for I shall do evils to you. Therefore Philistines came into the land of Judah, and set it in tents in the place. And they said unto Samson, We shall not slay thee, but we shall betake thee bonden. And they bonden him. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and the bondage with which he was bonden were scattered and broken. And he took the lower jawbone of an ass, and he killed with it 1,000 men. After these things, Samson loved a woman, and she was called Delilah. And the princes of Philistines came unto her, and said, Deceive thou him, and learn thou of him in what thing he hath so great a strength, and how we may overcome him. Therefore Delilah spake to Samson, I beseech you, say thou to me, wherein is thy greatest strength? To whom Samson answered, If I be bounden with 7 cords, I shall be feeble as other men. And the princes of Philistines brought unto her 7 cords, with which she bound him, which he brake the bondage, as if a man breaketh a thread. And Delilah 3 times pressed him how he might be bounden, and 3 times he spoke false to her. And she said to him, How sayest thou that thou lovest me, sithen thy soul is not with me? 3 times thou liedest to me, and noldest sayest to me, wherein is thy strength? Then he opened the truth of the thing, and said unto her, I am hallowed to the Lord. If mine head be shorn, my strength shall go away from me, and I shall be as other men. And she made him sleep on her knees, and bow the head in her bosom, and she shaved the hairs of him, and anon the strength yede away for him. And when the Philistines had attacked him, anon they put out his iron, and laden him bounden with chains, and closed him in prison. And now his hairs beginning to grow again, and the princes of Philistines came together to offer a sacrifice to Dagon their god. And they commanded that Samson should play before him, which was led out of prison, and they made him stand betwixt 2 pillars. Soothly, the house was full of men and of women, and the princes were in there, and about 3,000 of the Philistines. And Samson took both the pillars on which the house stood, and he held the one of thou in the right hand, and the t'other in the left hand. And when the pillars were unshaken together strongly, the house fell on all of the princes, and on the t'other multitude that was there. And he, dying, killed many more than he quick had slain before.
Samson dux fortissime, victor potentissime, quid facis in carcere, victor omnium, quiste quidit vincere, vel persomnium. O victor omnium victus es, o captor principum captus es, o raptor civium raptus es. Samson dux mirabilis, modo miserabilis, quid agis in angulo, tetri carceris, te diter gastulo, traus mulieris, avulsis oculis cecus est, et risus ostibus factus est, iam ponsis crinibus calvus est, sed si recreverint salvus est. Sponsa mihi placuit alienorum, ad amadi virginem Philistinorum. Favum mihi redidit rex bestiarum, iunsi caudas vulpium plus trecentarum. Dissipavi palmites tot vinearum, et combussi segetes agricolarum. 1000 rupi vinculat, 1000 perpericulat, propter Deu vengulat, fecit pot miraculat, post in solitudine, magna multitudine, gravi fortitudine, constipati veniunt, capere me cupiunt, pauci vix effugiunt. Circumdora hostibus, cum armis et fustibus, instant totis viribus, lanceis et ensibus, solus ipse viribus, prevalebam minibus, mille viros mortibus in prelio, meis dedi manibus et gladio, mille viros mortibus mandibula, tuis dedi morsibus a cellula. Sed quantum proicio vehementer siccio, setta quam exhibuit, quesitim compescuit, vetibi Philistim, sud tributis Ephraim, cui sic allofili, reputantur nihili, servitores Baalim, servierunt Neptalim, optimates Ismael, servierunt Israel. Urbem queva laberant, et me quasi vincerant fraudenter. Nocte diliculo surrexi clanculo silenter. Valvasque cum postibus e valens radicitus potenter. Montis super cilium scando riso rostium gaudenter. Posta mavida lida, teneram puellula, corpore juvengula, fraudibus vulpecula, cum libaret poculum, podigebat osculum, serviens ad oculum, seducebat seculum, quesivit mihi periculum. Dic mihi carissime, virorum fortissime, ubi pores viribus, precumtis mortalibus, ubi robor corporis, ubi virtus pectoris, utrum divo numine, prevalesan carmine. Vicis funibus vinciara crestibus, circumplexis crinibus cum ligio, parero mortalibus sicaio. Quid audit perfida, temptat arte callida, sed rumpuntullaquei, velut funestur pei. Femine terrestiti, quarto victus extiti, qui vincebam numina, victus sum a femmina. Prodolor, de tego miraculum, propudor, virtutis signaculum, properasis crinibus rasorio, parero mortalibus calvicio. cricis gremio, iam privatus dormio, virtutis auxilio, illa mordax vipera, ania prius tenera, furtim capit forfices, et clamavit principes, Filis Dei surgite, Clypeos et Lanceas arribite, Ieto, estem victum teneo, Ieto, calvatum derideo, Amorei Cannanei, Ebusei veniunt, Idumei Gergetsei, Feretzei capiunt, Filis Dei verberant, et ei me lacerant, orba verunt lumine, consecratum nomine, tanto perit fulmine, qui se credit femine. Nol und mici parcere, capio, vincio, crucior in carcere, risus et opprobria, quando festa veniunt, ludere me faciunt, sed cum crines prevenint, redam quid fecerit. Dies festus aderat, et senatus sederat, more dicunt solito gaude. Ludos nobis facito plaude. Crines crederunt, vires venerunt, hostes riserunt, hostes ruerunt, ludens lugebam, plaudens plangebam, risi plangendo, lusi plorando. Colon nasaripui, totam domum subrui. Gloriande crucio, cruciante glorio, feretria milia, occidunt per attria. Tanta victoria, Samson sit in gloria.
And that's quite a roller coaster of emotions, I think. Thank you for that, Peter. We have a couple of questions already, so I'm going to read these to you. Maybe you could respond to some of them, Peter.
Yes, certainly.
From Dan Nguyen, we have, what was the original context for these songs? Were they used in paraliturgical performance? If so, what sort? Also, what regions do these songs come from? So why don't we start with the paraliturgical performance first. We had a little bit of a discussion about this beforehand too.
Yes, yes, Dan, you're right. These are not songs that were done in a liturgical context. These are often referred to as monastic songs as well. So probably by people who were well versed in liturgical music, but not in the context of an actual liturgy. My guess is, and this is this is mainly guesswork, but I would assume that these are designed purely for entertainment, uplifting entertainment, but entertainment. They're not meant to serve a specific function, again, whether in the liturgy or in the school or something like that. One could perhaps suggest that they're used to help memorize biblical stories, but if you can memorize a song of this length, I think that you could memorize the original biblical text just as easily. So I think this is a nice example of music that's designed to be entertaining, but entertainment that's meant to be educational and uplifting. This is the sort of musical entertainment that Plato in his Republic would have approved of. This is an idea that's very much present in the Middle Ages as well. Johannes de Grocio, writing in France in the 12th century, has similar things to say about the estampes to what Plato says in the Republic. He talks about how, well, this repetition, which we also see in the sequence forms that these songs are written in, the repetition helps to focus the mind, bring it away from worldly and base thoughts and turn it toward higher things.
And that's certainly oh, I'm sorry, Peter.
Yes,
I just want to say that that's certainly a view of art and making music that's lacking very much in our society. The idea that a primary purpose of it is to be uplifting in some way, to elevate the human spirit. And I think that's something that's very much worth recovering if we possibly can.
Yes, I strongly agree with that. And as far as the region, these are mostly in the Anglo-French world. A lot of these, well, only one of these has a definite author attached to it. That's Peter Abelard, who definitely wrote the next song in the set and is sometimes suggested as a possible author for Samson. The prior piece was potentially by Walter Map, who was a Welshman educated in Paris and comes from an Irish manuscript. And the last piece is definitely English. But these are mainly, I mean, the great thing about Latin as a universal language of learning and liturgy is that you could write a piece in Latin and you could be a Welshman, you could be a Breton, you could be an Englishman, you could be whatever you wanted, and it would be usable throughout the medieval Catholic world. But the manuscript sources for these are mainly Paris and the British Isles.
And Dan also has another few questions. I'll get to those, and then we have one other question. So he asks,
Great.
Also, what is the notation system used to notate these songs? What sort of factors, musical or otherwise, are taken into consideration in order to recreate a historically informed performance of this genre? And he thanks you for this beautiful performance.
All right, I'm glad you're enjoying the performance, Dan. The notation of the first piece looks more or less like a simplified version of modern Gregorian chant notation. So square notes on a 4-line staff. There's no indication of rhythm in it, so that's mainly just based on the poetic line. Samson is a little bit more complicated. So that comes from the Harley manuscript 978, which is incidentally the source for one of the medieval top 20, Summer is a Comin' In, as well. And it was originally written in unmetered chant notation. However, shortly after the original writing of the manuscript, scholars think probably within the next 50 years or so, somebody went in and added tails to some of the notes to indicate rhythm. The rhythmic system at this time is fairly rudimentary. We just get longs and shorts, and you've got to figure out the rest based on the form and based on the rhythmic mode and things. So in that manuscript, the later version of Samson implies more or less a bit of what would sound like 6/8 to modern ears throughout. I made the decision in reconstructing this to go in the middle of the road a bit and use the unmetered version of it when I thought the text called for it, and bring in the rhythmic notation added by the later scribe in places that would serve to move the story along and express the text.
And that's what I think is exciting about that line between notation and beyond notation is the possibilities are sort of limitless, to be able to figure out what the rhythmic possibilities are in something where we don't have the same system that we use today.
Yes, definitely. And the poetry in Samson is so eloquent in the use of different line lengths and different rhythms, and you can feel the poet, whether it's Abelard or not, just playing with the language in a very musical way as well. And so that's part of the reason that I used both the meter and unmetered, because I thought that each one supports a different kind of use of the language.
Well, we have one more question, and it's from David and Serena, and they're asking, would these pieces be performed by one person like today, both vocal and accompaniment?
That is a very good question. If these were indeed performed by monks, I would think it would be likely to have more people involved in the performance. One of the manuscripts for Samson, not the one that I worked from, but one of the continental manuscripts for Samson does tell you when the chorus speaks, when Samson speaks, when Delilah speaks, and so forth. We are not sure, though, whether that implies different people and a presentation like a drama, or whether that's just to inform the singer. And as for who would play what, it depends on the instrument. So I mentioned earlier that the hurdy-gurdy I'm playing looks like the Cantigas de Santa Maria manuscript. One of the players in that picture has his mouth open and he's singing as well. That is absolutely not to say that this is the only way to do it. It is very likely, I would say almost certain, that these were performed in different ways in their original time period. And the factors that went into that, there may have been aspects of the tradition that we don't know today. That's the tantalizing and occasionally infuriating thing about medieval music, is there's just so much that we don't know about it. It may have been down to who had the instrument, who could play the instrument. Some of the hurdy-gurdies, in fact, required two people to play them. You'd have one to turn the crank and one to move the keys. So that suggests a very communal approach to music making, which is all, I suppose, a rather long way of saying I don't know, but but that's, as I say, an all too common answer in this sort of thing.
Well, that's the best way to say I don't know, though, with a lot of information.
You're very kind. Thank you.
That's my personal strategy if I can do it. Well, coming up, you're changing instruments, though, from the hurdy-gurdy to the harp, and it's being sung from the point of view of David, of King David, who of course is known for playing the harp and is often seen in art with a small harp in his hand, perhaps a medieval-looking harp in his hand.
Yes. I'll be using a very small early medieval style harp for this next piece. This next piece is pretty solidly attributed to Peter Abelard, which puts it right around the turn of the 11th to 12th century, when little harps like this one that I play in this next piece would have been rather common. And I made the decision to use the harp for this because the first line, he talks about the harp as the solace of his sorrow. And with a line like that, how could you not play it on the harp, really? This is another great example of I don't know coming into the performance of this music. The little harp like this, we don't have a very good idea of how it was used to accompany the voice. With later harps, later medieval harps and Renaissance harps and so on and so forth, you can do lots of wonderful things with drones. You can play open fifths, you can play chords if you get late enough, you can play along with the tune. There's all sorts of possibilities. But for a low voice like mine, a 2-octave harp on which the lowest note is middle C, just doesn't work very well to play an open fifth and sing a bit. You've got to add something to it. Benjamin Bagby has become something of an authority on the early medieval harp, and he suggests a much more complicated approach to it. He's the person to listen to if you want to hear great reconstructions of what the early medieval harp may have sounded like. But his hypothesis, to put it in a nutshell, and if you're interested in this sort of thing, you should really read his article, which is published in Ross Duffin's Performer's Guide to Medieval Music. But to put it in a very small nutshell, his hypothesis is that based on the literary evidence for how these harps were played, they were doing something really fantastic. The literature talks about the playing of these harps as being completely enchanting. He says that the harps were played, there's a quote, I think it's Tristan is said to play the harp so beautifully that the listeners forgot their own names. And that doesn't sound like playing open fifths. You may not forget your own name while I'm playing, but I've tried to move into something that I think allows the harp to support the voice in a way that gives it more interest.
And I do think it's quite inspiring what you did in this video, so well, everyone has to stay tuned for one moment. and also, I have another question about the hero concept again. This is from the point of view of David, but we also have at war Saul and Jonathan. So who's the hero in this case?
That's a good question. And we when we talked about this earlier, I told you I thought it was David because he's the first person speaker, and I still think that's a pretty good hypothesis. However, once you mentioned it, it got me thinking, and the lament for the fallen hero, which this clearly is, you'll hear both in Sarah's reading at the beginning and in the song, something that'll sound really familiar if you've ever read even like the Old English elegiac poetry or something. It could come straight out of The Wanderer or the Lay of the Last Survivor in Beowulf. And the lament for the fallen hero is a completely plausible reading for this as well. We could call Saul and Jonathan the heroes and David the guy who's left behind to sing about them, who then went on to be a hero in his own right, but maybe he hasn't become such yet.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question then. Well, I'll start the video now, and then we can discuss a little bit more after we're through.
Great.
A man appeared, and coming afore the castles of Saul, with the cloth to rent, and his head sprayant with dust. And as he came to David, he fell on his face and worshipped. And David said to him, What is the word which is done? Show thou to me. And he said, The people fled for the battle, and many of the people fellden and been dead. But also Saul and Jonathan his son perisheden. For so David took and to rent his clothes, and the men that were with him, and they waileden and wepten, and fasteden till to eventide, for Saul and Jonathan his son, and on the people of the Lord, and on the house of Israel, for they hadn't felled by the sword. And David said, Israel, behold thou, for these men that been dead, wounded on thy high places, the noble men of Israel, been slain on thee in hills. How fell the stronger men? Do not tell it in Geth, neither tell ye in the way meetings of Ascalon, lest peradventure the doctress of Philistines be glad, lest the doctress of uncircumcised men be glad. Hillis of Gelbo, neither dew neither rain come on you, neither the first fruitus of the fields, for the shield of stronger men was cast away there, the shield of Saul, who was anointed with oil. From the blood of slain men the arrows of Jonathan ne'er turned aback, and the sword of Saul turned not away empty. Saul and Jonathan, amiable and fair in life, they were swifter than eagles, stronger than lions. Daughtress of Israel, weep ye on Saul, that clothed ye with fine red cloth, that gave golden ornaments to your attire. How fellden down strong men in battle. Jonathan was slain in the he places. I make sorrow on thee, my brother Jonathan, full fair, and amiable more than the love of women. As a mother loveth her son, so I loved thee. How therefore fellden down strong men, and armorers of battle perished.
Deorum solatium, laborum remedium, mea mihi citara. Plus necessaria. Striges mania populi, regis morse fii, ostium victoria. Ducum desolatio, vulgi desperatio, luctur replant omnia. Amalek invaluit, Israel dum corruit, infidelis jubilat Philistea, dum lamentis macerat se Judea. In insultat fidelibus, infidelis populus, in honorem maximum plebs adversa, in derisum omnium fit divina. Insultantes inquium, ecce quogariunt, qualiteros prodit Deus servus. Dulma multis occidit, dis prostratus. Quem primunis prebuit, victus rex occubuit, talis est electio Dei sui, talis consecratio vatis mani. Saul regum fortissime, virtus invicta Jonathan, qui vos nequivit vincere, permissus est occidere. Quasi non esset oleo, consecratus Dominico, celeste manus gladio, jugulatur in prelio. Plus fratrem mihi Jonathan, in una mecum anima, que peccata, que scelera, nostra sciderunt viscera. Expertes montes gelboe, roris sitis et pluvie, nec agrorum primicie vestro succurant in cole. Tibi madida, telus cedere regia, quae temi Jonata, manus stravit impia. Christus Domini, Israelque incliti, morte miserabili, cum suis sunt perditi. Sion filie, super Saul sumite, largo cuius munere, vos ornaban purpure. Tu mihi mionata, Flandus super omnia, intercuncti gaudia, perpeseris lacrima. Consilio ad qui hevi pessimo, utibi presidio non esem in prelio, vel confusus pariter morere feliciter, cum quid amor faciat maius hoc non habeat, et me poste vivere, morisit assidue, nec ad vitam anima satissit dimidia. Vicem amicicie, velunam meredere, oportebat tempore, sumet unc angustiae, triumphi participem, vel ruine comitens, ut vele riperem, vel tecum ocumberem. Vitam pro definiens, quam salvasti togiens, ut et mors nos iungeret, magis quam disjungeret. In fausta victoria, pogius interea, tam vana quam brevia, hic percepi gaudia, quam cito durissimus, est secutus nuncius, quem in suam animam locutum superbiam. Mortuis quos nunciat, irat amor sagregat, Ut doloris nuntius, doloris it socius. Doquiedem fidibus, velemur et plantibus, sic passem et fletibus, lesis pulsum anibus, raucis planctu vocibus, deficit et spiritus.
Something that I find very interesting about this music is that well, first of all, I have to say that I'm not terribly familiar with the world of medieval music, and so I'm hoping that we can rectify that in the future. Get myself involved in some projects and learn a lot more about it. But I found that regardless of whether you know anything about it or not, that there's the ability to turn each of these phrases, each of these ideas into a different emotional thought. And I think it's exciting what you've done with that, Peter.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, it's that's the blessing and the curse, I suppose, of having the freedom that one has in performing medieval music. As you've probably gathered from other things that I've said, there are some things set in stone, but there are many more things that are not set in stone. And even in rather codified chant notation, this piece that I just did is fairly straightforward as far as the notation goes, but it only gives you the pitches. And even without adding discernible rhythm to it, there's a lot that you can do with that, with the rhetoric of these pieces. And this piece particularly, we know this was written by Abelard, who was noted as a master of rhetoric and a master of debate. And so I think it's absolutely worth looking for all the different ways that he uses this language and thinking about the ways that one can bring it out.
And we got one more question from Dan. I want to tell everybody if you have any other questions, please ask them on Discord, and right after the presentation we'll take a look at them and get back to you. But Dan asks, since it isn't notated, what stylistic idioms are informing this harp accompaniment? And I know there's a lot of unknown in there, but with are there any like categories of types of figures that you use or to approach it?
That's another very good question, Dan. There's not a specific style of harp playing that I've modeled it after. What I've done instead is I just spent a lot of time with the harp and with the piece. So you probably heard fragments from within the piece. There were a few bits of it that worked well together to make a little bit of an ostinato sort of accompaniment. And then finding a pentatonic scale that worked well as both as a scalar figure and as a sort of a tone cluster, which I know sounds terribly modern, but I find that that's a technique that works really well on these little harps to give a sound that feels good to sing into. So again, I'm afraid I must say I don't know, but in a more complicated fashion. But it's mainly just experimentation and trying to let the harp and the music dictate the way that they want to work together.
And I think that's a great place to start. It has a great result. So we have one final piece for you, and it's sort of shorter than the other three, I believe.
That's correct. It's a bit shorter, and it's even in English, Middle
Yes.
English, but getting closer. You may be able to catch a few words if you've been listening carefully to Sarah.
We still have super titles on this one, so you can catch your modern English if you need along the way.
Good.
And I want to comment about this one and the parallel that it had to the last Academy performance. We did Giannettini's La Vittima d'Amore for our past performance, and it dealt a lot with Jesus being on the cross and the idea that he was happy to be there, happy to be able to suffer for humankind. And in La Vittima d'Amore, we have both St. John and Mary trying to say, how about me? Can I take your place in some way? In this work that's coming up, we just have Mary saying, can I die first? Is there any way this can not happen? But it's a medieval version of something that appears a few hundred years later in the Baroque period with very much the same themes that must have been alive over the course of those centuries.
Yes, and it's a fascinating thing to think about. We know that Mary was at the crucifixion from the Gospel of John, but thinking about what that must have felt like for her, and it's if you pay close attention to the text of this song, you'll see that both a couple of interesting points. She realizes that this is the sword that Simeon predicted would pierce her heart at the presentation of Christ in the temple. And a line that stuck out to me, and Jeremy, I know you commented on this earlier as well, was something to the effect of, Mother, I have to do this for you. If I don't die, you will go to hell, which is an interesting way to think of Mary as well.
What a powerful thought there.
Yes, being that she's immaculately conceived and things, but the necessity of Christ's death on the cross in order to allow salvation for everyone, even his mother, who one would assume, compared to the rest of us, did not need it. But even she did. And further on, he also tells her that you have to undergo this pain. You have to see me die. You have to undergo the worst pain a mother can endure, because then you'll be able to really, it doesn't use the word empathize, but then you'll be able to really intercede for those who pray through you. Because, again, Mary being conceived without sin and all of that would not have been, I think, and I should preface this by saying I am in no way a theologian nor a priest, and you should talk to one of those if you want an actual answer on this, but Mary would not have had the full experience of human suffering as someone who is conceived immaculate.
And so it's a very interesting pairing, because it's a teaching moment of a sort at the same time as this is almost like a prayer, and it ends with an amen as well at the end.
Yes, and there is the last couple of verses. The last couple of verses we have a sort of a chorus voice that we're speaking as mere humans who need salvation more than Mary did. We're speaking about the event at the very end there. And so you'll see in the translations.
And so I was going to mention that the translation of the previous one was by John Stevens, and that Peter actually did the translation for this final one. So I'll roll this final clip.
They token Jesu and laden him out, and he bare to himself a cross, and went out into that place that is said of Calvary, and in Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified in him, and other twain with him, una on this side, and una on that side, and Jesu in the middle. And Pilate wrote a title and set it on the cross, and it was written, Jesu of Nazareth, King of Jews. But beside us the cross of Jesus stood in his mother, and the sister of his mother Marie Cleof, and Marie Magdalene. Therefore, when Jesu had sayen his mother, and the disciple standing whom he loved, he saith to his mother, Woman, lo, thy son. Afterward he saith to the disciple, Lo, thy mother. And fro that hour the disciple took her in as his mother. Afterward Jesus, witting that now all a thing is been ended, that the scripture were fulfilled, he saith, I thirst. And a vessel was set full of vinegar, and they laden and hyssop about the sponge full of vinegar, and put into his mouth. Therefore, when Jesus had taken the vinegar, he said, It is ended. And when his head was bowed down, he gave up the ghost.
Stand well, moder on the road. Behold the child with glad moder. Blie the moder nicht obey. Son, I blie the stonde. I se di fet, I se din honde. Neilen to the hard tre. Moder, tu the weeping, I thought this did for mannes thing, for on a guilt of no. So, I fell the dead a stunde, det svärd is at min herte grunde, dat me behichte Simeon. Modere upon ne bære, wash away the bloody terror, that do me worse than me dead. Son, wo mich die terre svärne, I se the bloody flode serne, ut of din herte to me fem. Moder, nu I mig det säger, better is that each on a day, than all man kin to helle gå. Son I se di body sunge, de brest din hånd di fått frostånge, nå se in I storme beå. Moder di fightar det terror, I finne death will cost to hell. I fall this did for thine sake. Sonner du best me så minde, ne wit me not it is me kinde, that ye for this sorve mercy that made day for Adam out of hell bear, and man kin that is forlorn. Son, what shall me torrent? The pina pineth me torrent. Darfst du mich lehren, what pinafol that children bear, what sorrow have that child forgot. So ni what I can they tell, but not be the pain of hell, more sorrow ne what you know. Mother care, the host of mother father, though thou became a maiden man, son help at alle neder, alle thou that omegredo, maiden and weave and full women. In all dweller, the time is come me far to hell, the thread is upon. Sonny will with the thunder, it is of thin wonder, so ralph dead was never known. One rose then fell the sorrow, the bliss sprung the thread more, well bleed the modern worth Modern for that ilka bliss, Besechur God ur sinnes lisse, du beur shed aien ur fall. Blessed be thou Queen of Heaven, bring us out of hell heaven, durch die devil's sones be. Order for that here blood, that he shadow upon the road, lead us into heaven
And the bells are also beautiful at the end. Yeah. It sounds to me like there's a lot of sorrow and sacrifice that goes into being a hero in this case.
Yes, there certainly is. I should say quickly, my wireless headphones ran out of batteries during that last. So I apologize if this throws off our microphone balance. But yes, I think you're right. That we've gone through rather a wide spectrum of possibilities for being a hero, whether that is listening and following directions like Noah, the more conventional sort of heroism like Samson, or even suffering like David and Christ.
Yeah, and I wanted to also mention that these videos will make available on the Academy YouTube channel, and so you'll be able to access that afterwards. And this is a good reminder that if you're watching this right now, please subscribe to us on YouTube. I know some people already did over the course of this presentation, over this performance. So please be another one. Subscribe to our channel and spread that good news. And also, if you saw us on Facebook, please like our channel, and that's another way to keep in touch and also help us spread what the Academy is doing. So I want to thank you again, Peter, for being here today and putting this wonderful program together. It was a pleasure to be able to listen to all of this, and I also got to put all the subtitles in, so I got to hear this phrase by phrase, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jeremy. I'm honored to be a part of what the Academy is doing, and I'm so happy to have had a chance to put this project together with you.
Course of the year, if something like a vaccine comes out or something unexpected happens over the course of the year. So we'll keep an eye out and we'll adjust accordingly. But at this point, our entire season is going to be online. And so we're still asking people to be members for this year if they're able. We're still going to be sending around, it's coming late and I apologize for that, but we'll be sending around the beta version of our newly updated journal, the Sacred Drama Journal, and that's coming out soon. And then we'll have our first full installation as a peer-reviewed journal during the course of the next year. So that would be included with the membership. So, and you also help tide us over until the next year for all the people who are collaborating with us and working on these programs throughout the year. So we thank you if you're able to do that, and we'll send around that drive, the membership drive, fairly soon. So until then, thanks a lot for tuning in, and thank you again, Peter. I'm looking forward to actually making music with you in real life soon.
Likewise. Let's hope we can do this in person soon and get you into some medieval music as well.
That's right. I'm looking forward to that. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night, all.